When I did my Railway series stories that should be adapted to TV, a few people asked the same question: where was Mountain Engines? A valid concern. Mountain Engines is my favourite Railway series book, so you would think that I would want it adapted to TV. But my answer to that is hell no. I do not want Mountain Engines adapted to TV. Even if we go back to the glory days of Thomas and Friends, classic era style, I do not want Mountain Engines touched with a 10-foot barge pole. Once again, these are all my own personal opinions. Your thoughts will probably differ than mine. That's the one thing that makes the Thomas fandom so unique. And let me know in the comments if you would want Mountain Engines adapted to TV. All I ask is that you be respectful and above all, enjoy the video. Okay, let's dive in with my first point as to why I don't want Mountain Engines to ever be adapted to TV. And the first reason is it's too dark for modern audiences. One of the things that I love about the Mountain Engines book is that it is dark. Not just the illustrations. The illustrations are feckin' terrifying, but the stories themselves have more of a grit, more of an edge, and more of a mystery to them than sadly modern audiences can cope with. Times have changed, a lot of ways for the better, I might add. And it's right that we should protect young children from darker, more disturbing themes about mortality and death until they're a bit older. You all know that I am a dad of twin boys. I am a bit of a helicopter slash overprotective parent. I don't shy away from that. In fact, I'd probably embrace it a bit more than I should. But it's something that you don't realise until you become a parent. Never thought I'd say that in my life. That you want to do everything you can to protect your kids. You don't want them exposed to darker themes and more intense subject matter until they're older. When you're a kid, you want to know everything because you think you can handle it. But then when you get older, you realise that maybe you were too young to know those truths and really fully comprehend them in a way that you would understand now as an adult. This might have seemed like a tangent, but the point is Mountain Engines is a really dark book. It does deal with mortality. It does deal with death. Hell, it even deals with cannibalism because of the infamous engine that fell down the mountain, and then they say, yeah, we cannibalised them for our parts. It does give you the tagline at the end saying, yeah, they were just making it up. But there's still that part of you that goes, were they really? Audrey did have a bit of a sick sense of humour. But even the thought of it is enough to send chills down the modern day audience's spines. So yeah, I'm gonna be that parent, I'm gonna be that guy. I think it's too dark for modern audiences to handle. Leave it as a book for when they're older if they want to read it and they understand the concepts a bit more. But a general audience market, especially the way Thomas and Friends is now, they would not be able to handle it. Which actually brings me to my second point. I don't trust Mattel to do it justice. Thomas and Friends is not what it once was. All Engines Go really took the franchise to a point that was unrecognisable, which is why it's classed as a reboot. But it wasn't even that was the final death nail in this Thomas and Friends coffin. The Big World Big Adventures era was really what done it in. That was the let's pander to babies and toddlers part of Thomas and Friends, before we got All Engines Go. And them trying to do Mountain Engines, one of the most beloved books in the Railway series' history, I think it would be too much for them to handle. They wouldn't want to adapt the darker themes of this book. And if they tried to adapt it, it would be so watered down that it wouldn't resemble what we know from the Railway series book. We'd be more outraged about it. Yes, in CGI, you could do the mountain scenery beautifully. If you had that CGI style that was going between seasons 17 to 20, I would trust that team to do it better than I would if it was the Big World Big Adventures team. And before you say anything about like Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, there was some dark moments in that, but I don't know if they would have gotten away with it with Mountain Engines. So I'm kind of glad that it never got adapted, and while it's in Mattel's hands, I don't trust them to do it. And they don't need to do it because, point number 3, there's a plethora of fan-made content out there. I'm not the only person that loves the Mountain Engines book. Tons of fans in the Thomas and Friends community love this book. So much so they've done their own adaptations. And very well, I might add. There's been some very successful adaptations of this book that have managed to stay true to the origins of the book. And it's so much more readily available. There's even fan content that explores some of the consequences. You all know my thoughts on Little Owl's story about what could have happened to Godred if he really was cannibalized for all his parts. That is fucking terrifying. So if you want your mountain engines fix, just go on YouTube. Plenty of material around it, and it's all good stuff. And my final point, I like that it's a Railway series exclusive. Everything about Mountain Engine screams one and done. It was one book that focused on an entirely different part of the railway with completely new characters, exploring their origins, their backstory, and then poof, never hear from them again. That's right, you don't hear from them at all in the entire Railway series. And I like that. The more I get older, the more I really appreciate that. I mentioned previously, fans have adapted this book, and I do like those adaptations. But I do love the fact as well that it's a little pocket of this universe. It's never touched on again, because it gets your imagination going. You think about these engines and that little mountain railway, and what other adventures could they have? And sometimes that's the best part, using your imagination and thinking, what if? There's a reason why it was never touched on again. Maybe they just done what they wanted to do with it, were perfectly satisfied with those stories, and felt like they didn't need to touch it again. And I kind of agree with that. There's a reason why this book is my favourite out of all of the Railway series stories as I get older, because it's perfect just the way it is. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Would you like to see Mountain Engines be adapted to TV? Have you watched any fan content on Mountain Engines that you particularly liked? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, keep on chugging.